This of talking points, frankly, throughout this process has been a sideshow. There's no there. Keep in mind, by the way, these so-called talking points that were prepared for Susan Rice 5-6 days after the event occurred, pretty much matched the assessments that I was receiving at that time in my presidential daily briefing. The whole thing defies logic. We've got a whole bunch of people in the State Department who consistently say, you know what, I'm willing to step up, I'm willing to put myself in harm's way. We dishonor them when we turn things like this into a political circus.
That was very dismissive, President Obama, earlier today during a joint press conference with British Prime Minister David Cameron. And while our commander-in-chief brushes off the Benghazi controversy as, quote, a political circus, well, it sure doesn't look like this massive national security cover-up is going to go away anytime soon. Joining me now on the phone with exclusive reaction, former Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney. Mr. Vice President, welcome back, sir.
Good evening, Sean. Great to talk to you.
You know, I'm listening to those there. It sounded to me like a little bit of a challenge, reminding me a little bit of when Gary Hart said, just follow me.
Yeah, well, they did.
And so they did.
No, I watched the Benghazi thing with great interest, Sean. I think it's one of the worst incidences, frankly, that I can recall in my career. It put the whole capability, claiming the terrorist problem is solved once we got bin Laden, that al-Qaeda was over with. If they told the truth about Benghazi, that it was a terrorist attack by an al-Qaeda-affiliated group, it would have destroyed the false image of competence that was the basis of his campaign for re-election. So they lied. They claimed it was because of a demonstration video, so they wouldn't have to admit that it was really all about their incompetence. That the State Department and the White House NSC ignored repeated warnings from the CIA about the threat. They ignored messages from their own people on the ground that they needed more security. Indeed, they reduced what was already there. And the administration either had no forces ready to respond to an attack, which should have been anticipated on the anniversary of 9/11, or they refused to deploy them when our people asked for help.
You know, Mr. Vice President, the president claiming the talking points didn't matter. The original talking points and the CIA's assessment was 100% accurate, that this was terror-related. Ansar al-Sharia, al-Qaeda-linked group, they got it right, and then 12 versions later, it evolved into something that everybody on the ground knew had nothing to do with the attack, a YouTube video, and that this was somehow spontaneous. And that's what Susan Rice said on the 5 Sunday programs, and that's what the president was telling the world via the UN 2 weeks later, when everybody knew that that wasn't true. And Jay Carney saying these are stylistic changes. They were dramatic, substantive changes. So what do you think is worse, the before, the during, or the after part of this? Seems to me the cover-up always makes it worse.
Right. Well, they tried to cover it up by constructing a false story, claiming there was confusion about what had happened at the Benghazi consulate. There was no confusion. It was obvious as soon as we got the Ambassador Stevens on the phone that night, and he said, quote, "We are under attack." The cover-up included several officials, up to and including President Obama, and the cover-up is still ongoing.
Yeah. Let's go to the before part. We now know, and we learned this at the hearings last week, the CIA knew that this particular consulate was a potential threat, and as you mentioned, especially on the anniversary of 9/11. And we know that the ambassador and others requested additional security, but yet they were denied that. Isn't that a hotbed of terrorist training there?
Well, it is. It's but more than that. I think the agency probably had more than we've seen. I've seen at least one account today that indicated, I guess this was maybe in the Weekly Standard, that they had picked up message traffic that involved an individual who had actually participated in the attack and who was a member of the Ansar al-Sharia, the al-Qaeda-related or affiliated organization. And there was never any doubt about what was happening here. And the whole notion, as they've gone through this process trying to get to the truth, they did exactly the opposite. I think I've heard you say this as well, too. You start out with the truth, as reported by the intelligence community, and then you turn it into a total distortion once the political types in the White House and some senior folks at the State Department get their hands on it.
What do you make of the fact that we learned last week that there were 2 specific stand-down orders? We know in the case of the CIA annex about a mile away that 2 brave Navy SEALs were ordered not to go help, but they did it anyway. Both of them lost their lives in this attack.
Right.
And then we have another stand-down order, but we don't know who gave the stand-down order. Now, you've been in the White House. All we know is the president was informed the attack was ongoing and never inquired afterwards for an update, and then got up the next morning after he went to bed and went campaigning. Does that sound like normal operating procedure?
It doesn't. It doesn't sound like their own procedure. Remember when they were doing the bin Laden raid, you got pictures all over the place of the president sitting in the Situation Room monitoring the takedown of Osama bin Laden. This was exactly the opposite of that. I think there's a whole set of questions that need to be asked, Sean, about the military chain of command. In my past experience, when we got into these situations, especially after 9/11, we were always on the step, locked and loaded, ready to go on 9/11. We've got specially trained units that practice this sort of thing all the time. They're very good at it, and they're chomping at the bit to go. And there, for example, there is a contingency team or an extremist team, it's often referred to, assigned to the SINC, the commander-in-chief, the local area. Where were they that night? Why hadn't provisions been made to have forces within range, say at Sigonella in Sicily, which is just an hour away from Benghazi? Why weren't they deployed there, ready to go to take action in any of those areas in the Middle East or North Africa? It makes no sense. I mean, they totally ignored their responsibility, partly because they didn't want to admit they had a problem. They were trying to perpetuate this fiction that there's no terrorist threat because they got bin Laden, and that's a lie.
Well, that would be consistent with the denial of radical Islamic terrorists that we've witnessed now throughout the Obama presidency. Let me ask you one last question, if I may, sir.
Sure.
And that is the IRS targeting groups that had the name Tea Party or Patriot, or those that desired to make America a better place to live, or those that criticized how the country was being run, or those that talked about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You've been around Washington a long time in a number of administrations. The IRS being used for a political witch hunt against those that have differing viewpoints. How dangerous is this for the president himself?
I think it's very dangerous. I can't believe some guy down in the bowels of the organization in Cincinnati, set this up. It would require, I would think, because of the sensitivity of it, somebody pretty high up to sign off on it. And apparently, fairly senior people I'm hearing now have been told, known for at least 2 years. It's one of the most egregious abuses of government power that I can think of, and I remember well back in the Watergate days when one of the counts against Richard Nixon was that his abuse of power by calling the IRS in to investigate, do audits on certain individuals that were his adversaries.
All right, Mr. Vice President, how